singing, the moment we started singing that song, John just hadn't been able to stop talking about it. And the reason is because John loves Jesus, and he wants other people to love Jesus and to choose Jesus. I've worked with a lot of worship pastors through the years. Many of them should just be called music people because they care about just music and not really about pastoring. John Odell cares about pastoring, and this music thing was just what God used for him to pastor people. So I'm thankful for the pastoring that he has done. He's not established a good standard for music. He has. Don't hear that. That came off wrong. You know, it's like it sounds good here, and like most things I say, it doesn't sound good there. It's not music. He's established what it means to pastor well. And I'm thankful for John. Thankful for John. Enough of that. We'll do that some more. Yeah, move on. Move on. If you have a Bible, and I hope that you do, turn with me to Genesis chapter 47. Genesis 47. Shared in the first service. In spite of how much we love John, he's still just one big mess. But you know, so are all of us. We're just one big mess. For these last 17 years, we've been in Genesis, working our way through it, talking about through this lens of being messy people. Some of you are like, you haven't been here for 17 years. Thank you. This idea of messy people, God created something that was not a mess, and people messed it up. Yet God, in his graciousness, has constantly been pursuing messy people, trying to draw them, and bring them back to him. People mess things up. God never does. And I'm so thankful that we serve a God who's not a mess. Yet he loves people who are. And so as we've just kind of been working through the story found in Genesis, the last number of weeks we've been looking at the life of Joseph. And Joseph had quite the rocky beginning. He was hated by his brothers. He was sold into slavery. He had quite a time just trying to make it. Yet about 15, 20 years into that, he finds himself in the presence of Pharaoh. See, Pharaoh had been having a dream, and he couldn't figure out what the dream meant, and no one in all of Egypt could figure out what the dream meant. But there was a guy who had encountered Joseph in prison, and he knew that Joseph could tell Pharaoh what he was dreaming. And so Pharaoh and Joseph get together, and Pharaoh tells Joseph, I've had a dream, and no one can tell me the dream. And Joseph is very upfront. He says, hey, listen, I'm going to be able to interpret your dream, but know this, it's not really me. It's going to be God that's interpreting your dream. And so Pharaoh tells the dream, and Joseph says, hey, here's what the dream means. For 7 years, you're going to have plenty. The land is going to be blessed, but you got to get ready, because after those 7 years, the land is going to experience a famine like no other, and you will forget the plenty is going to be so bad. And what's interesting is we were kind of working up to that, but then because of the famine, Joseph encountered the very same brothers who sold him into slavery, and I think it's easy in that moment to kind of forget about the fact of why the brothers found themselves in Joseph's presence. They were there because of the famine, but then for the last number of weeks, we've looked at this story of restoration. We've looked at healed relationships. We've seen Joseph and Jacob reunited in the beautiful reunion that it was. But all the while, what's going on in the background? We have this famine, and it wasn't good. Life has a tendency to throw us into the deep end. And even though we might not experience a famine when it comes to food, we do experience many famines in life. Famines when it comes to relationships, where we find ourselves in a season without peace, without clarity, wanting so desperately just to move through that season of famine. Sometimes we even find ourselves in a famine of hope. God, if I could just have a hope in tomorrow. Genesis 47 really gets into that famine, really starts to let us know about some of the things that were going on, how devastating the famine was. And Joseph's the one in the midst of all that who remains calm, who remains at peace. He's the steady individual, the steady character within the story of the famine. And this morning what I want us to do is I want us to look at how Joseph demonstrates his faith in the famine. Because we will all find ourselves in seasons of discouragement, seasons of chaos. And if you're a follower of God, as chaotic as things might get, you need to be a person of faith. This morning, I want us to look at some of these reminders that we should carry with us when it comes to faith in the famine. And the first thing that we see in kind of the situation that's taking place here is that we find a scene, we find a situation that is very chaotic, yet Joseph brings calm. In the middle of a famine, we need to be calm in spite of the chaos. And the chaos is very real. It says right off the bat in verse number 13, now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe. In case you wondered if the famine was in fact a difficult thing, it was a difficult thing. And there was no food to be had. And I'm not sure about you, there are few things that I could imagine being more anxiety-ridden than feeling like I couldn't feed my family. See, here in Western Christianity, I think sometimes we confuse wants and needs. We equate some of the things that are just kind of niceties, they're first world problems, and we kind of translate those into things that we need. But in all reality, if we had those things taken away, we'd be fine. But there are some very core needs of human beings that really push us over the edge of anxiety. One of those is shelter, having a place to lay your head at night. The other that I see as being a very real thing is food. How do you feed your family? I personally can't imagine a world like that. Some of you might be able to. The famine was real. The chaos was right in front of them, but it continued to get chaotic. And as chaos builds, desperation builds with it. And the people of Egypt find themselves in a very desperate place. It says in verse number 15, when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. Joseph has a conversation with them. He shares with them a plan, but it continues to build. Verse number 18, a year goes by. When the year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, we will not hide from my Lord that our money is all spent. The herds of the livestock are my Lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Not only is it a desperate situation, it's an increasingly desperate situation. The desperation runs deep. People are filled with anxiety. They wonder what tomorrow's going to hold. There's chaos. But in the midst of the chaos, there's a voice of calm in the life of Joseph. You see, knowing that there was no food in all the land, it says in verse number 14 that Joseph immediately starts acting out of his calm. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. But after all that grain had been utilized, they come to Joseph. Give us food. Why should we die? So Joseph answered, verse number 16, give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock. But a year went by and they no longer had any food. So they come to Joseph again, down kind of halfway through verse 19 or beginning verse 19. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food. And we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. The world was chaotic. The people were chaotic. Joseph was not. Joseph was calm. And I believe Joseph was able to be calm because of the faith that he had in the Lord. I don't think this is a self-produced calm. This is a calm that comes from God. Have you ever known someone that was just able to be calm in the midst of crazy? Like everyone's around you just kind of running around with their hair on fire, but that person's like, no, I think all's good. Just kind of taking it one step at a time. I've probably shared this story before. And after the embassy in Iran was seized and hostages were taken, there was a plan put in place to go and rescue the hostages. And the plan included multiple branches of the military to fly in special operators to then infiltrate the embassy and to rescue the hostages and to get them out of Iran. The story that I often kind of think about is told in the book Inside Delta Force. It's just kind of one of those books, those key books that was written to talk about the formation of that elite force within the Army. And so the operation kind of went, they had a bunch of C-130s those are airplanes that carried people into kind of that beginning place. They had helicopters that went with them, but a lot of the helicopters, they just weren't built for the desert. And so a number of the helicopters had to turn back. On those C-130s, on those airplanes, they had big blivets inside of them to where those blivets were filled with jet fuel in order to refuel everybody once they rescued the hostages and then to get them back. But by the time they got to the desert, the mission was a disaster. It wasn't going to work. So they have to abort the mission and head back to the ships that were in the Gulf there to try to kind of figure out what to do next. Well, after they make that decision, they start getting ready to. They start getting ready to take off. One of the C-130s is kind of taxiing in the desert, and one of the helicopters was not paying attention, and they collided. They collided before the C-130 was off the ground, and it immediately causes kind of a semi-explosion to take place, and a fire starts rushing through the cabin of the C-130. Now, they weren't sitting in, the special operators, Delta Force guys that were on that C-130, they weren't sitting in chairs, they were laying on top of the blivets that were filled with jet fuel. I don't know about you, and I'm not that smart of a person, but jet fuel and fire, I don't think go together. And so as the fire is rushing through the C-130, the operators begin to look for ways to get out of the airplane. And so they're kind of moving away from the fire. They find a door that is open, and they all kind of jump out, and they're all good. Well, as they get off the airplane, they're looking back to make sure everybody else is getting off, and all of a sudden one of the other Delta Force operators comes jumping out of the airplane like he's skydiving. And about 6 to 10 feet later, he hits the ground. And chaos ensues, but they start having this conversation afterwards and said, man, what was going on? Why'd you get out of the airplane like that? He said, well, when they started to take off, he had fallen asleep. Because if you've ever been in the military, you take the opportunity to sleep when you can. If you're a special operator, I mean, they just have the ability to sleep in really weird places. Well, he had fallen asleep and had woken up to a cabin filled with flames. And so he thought they had taken off, and he jumped out of the airplane. And they said, you didn't have a parachute. He said, one problem at a time. That's incredible. That's a calm in the midst of chaos. Church, if you're a follower of the Lord, when the world falls into chaos, God's people should be the steady. And we're not able to be calm because the storm is small. We're able to be calm because God is big. And he's the one that we trust in. Full disclosure, this last week has been a special week as a number of the staff, we've had an opportunity just to kind of talk through some life with John. It's been a lot of fun to talk through life. Some of the things that have gone on through the years. There have been times in the life of Emmanuel to where things were chaotic. But John was a calm voice. We as followers of God must be calm in the midst of the chaos, not because of us, but because of the faith that we have in the Lord. We can have faith in the famine. But really, it's not just enough to be calm. In the midst of chaos, people are looking towards other individuals to help them through the chaos. And Joseph does something really kind of spectacular in this moment. As the chaos begins to build, Joseph remains committed to God's plan instead of trying to do things on his own. He remains committed to God's plan instead of trying to do things on his own. If we were to go back to Genesis chapter 41, to where Pharaoh and Joseph start to have this conversation about the dreams that Pharaoh was having, and Joseph began to kind of go through his life and unpack with Pharaoh not just what the dream meant, but the very things that needed to take place after, now that it was realized what was getting ready to happen. See, I don't believe that plan came to Joseph on a whim. I believe that God planted that plan inside the heart of Joseph. And when things got crazy, Joseph remained committed to that. See, it's verse number 14, where Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt to help provide for the people of Egypt. It was Joseph who said in verse number 16, give me your livestock and I'll give you food in exchange for your livestock. What a brilliant way to stay close to God's plan. See, why not let people keep the livestock for their own food? Well, because they might go through that food faster than they needed to. Joseph remained committed to that plan. When the desperation continued to mount, and they said, and the people offered up, the people of Egypt offered up, buy us and our land. We'll serve Pharaoh. Joseph stays committed to God's plan, realizing there's something far greater on the other end of this famine. And it says in verse number 21, as for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh, and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, he did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. See, in the midst of the chaos, they were paralyzed by the desperation of the situation, yet Pharaoh, staying close to God's plan, was able to say, here are the things you need to do to get us through this difficult season. It's not that Joseph was enslaving the people of Egypt to Pharaoh. It's he was enabling them to make it through this difficult season to where they could be alive. And their trust in him was so high. It says in verse number 25 that they said, you have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, and we will be servants to Pharaoh. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. When life gets difficult, it's so tempting to go it on our own, to come up with our own ideas, to develop our own plan. But when life gets difficult, church, it is imperative to do things God's way. Is it possible that you find yourself in a chaotic situation and you come up with a plan that turns out good? Is that possible? Sure. Would the scenario exist, though, to where life gets chaotic and God comes up with a plan and the plan fails? Would that ever happen? Never. See, you and I might get lucky on occasion when it comes to our plan. God is never lucky. God is always God. And his plan is always good. The chaos was mounting, yet Joseph remained calm. He was committed to God's direction instead of going it his own way. And if that were the whole story, that'd be fine, but there's something else that's embedded into the story, and that's this. In the midst of all of the chaos that's taken place, in the midst of this severe famine that is absolutely wreaking havoc on the land, God blesses Israel. Israel is blessed, and that provision from God is attributed to God's blessing, not personal accomplishments. Why did Israel thrive? Because God blessed them. Look at verse number 27. In the midst of all the chaos, it says, thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. Egypt wasn't fruitful. Egypt wasn't multiplying greatly, but who was? Israel. And why was Israel flourishing? Why was Israel being fruitful? Why was Israel being able to multiply? It's not because Joseph had a good plan. It's because God is a faithful God. God had established his covenant with the nation of Israel, and a covenant that extended backwards hundreds of years. It wasn't just a covenant with Jacob. It wasn't just a covenant with Isaac. It went all the way back to Abraham, and God was the one who was going to bring about this covenant. There was nothing that the world could do to derail God from bringing about his promises. God was the one who blessed. Goshen was success. The land of Goshen was successful not because of Joseph's brilliance, but because God is a covenant keeper. And church, this is very real in our lives. Every good and wonderful thing comes from the Lord. I mean, even if you have talents, even if you have gifts in your life that make it appear that you've done something, know this, the blessings come from the Lord. Because sometimes we might get it right on our own. If we're not careful, we'll say, hey, look what I did. But if we're consistent, as soon as things go sideways, what should we say? Oh, look what I did. God never missteps. God never messes up. And just because life might be sideways sometimes doesn't mean that God is out of control. God is the one who blesses, and the blessing just continues in such a way to where you really see it bring to a crescendo in the life of Jacob as he finds his life coming to an end. It says in verse number 28, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if now I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. Joseph answered, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. What was the ultimate blessing that Jacob was going to get to experience? To know that he wasn't going to be buried in the land of Egypt, but that his body would be taken back to be buried alongside his fathers, his family. What a blessing that can only come from the Lord. We all experience famine. And faith in the famine of life isn't always flashy. So instead of flashiness, what does it require of us? It requires that we remain fixed and focused on the Lord, that we can be calm in the midst of chaos, committed to God's plan and trying to do things on our own, and attributing every good and wonderful blessing to the Lord instead of trying to take credit for ourselves. I want to give you a few things this morning. A few things for you to consider this week as you go about your life. The first is this, is I want to challenge you to reflect on your response to chaos in your life. How do you respond to chaos? When life goes sideways, what do you do? When the situation's marked by stress, by fear, by not having something, when you get squeezed, what comes out? Do you react with panic, or do you respond with faith? I encourage you to take some time this week and allow God to reveal areas of chaos in your life. And after he reveals those areas of chaos, let him reveal how you're responding to that chaos. If you're responding with panic, pray and ask God to give you a peace as you walk through life faithfully with him. Another thing I want to encourage you with this morning is to stay committed to God's direction. If God has called you to something, follow him toward that something. Know this, God is never going to call you to something that's going to violate this. I think one of the most frustrating conversations that I have with people is when they talk about things that God has done in their lives, but it directly counters the word of God. God's not going to ever have you do something that's going to counter who he is. But know this, when God calls you to do something, do it. Even when it gets hard, you need to do it. It would be better to be 7,000 miles away from comfort and in God's will than 1 mile away from comfort outside of God's will. Remain committed to God's direction. When it comes to God's provision in your life, give him glory. Don't take the glory for yourself. Because someday that provision, the provision that you are providing for yourself is going to run up. And what are you going to do in that moment? God's not there just to make your life easy when you've made your life hard. Now give God the glory for provision. And know that even if you find yourself in a season of chaos, God is still with you. And finally, let me leave you with this. See, it's one thing to go through a season of famine, chaos on our own, and to experience the goodness of God. But know this, we are surrounded by people who are going through seasons of famine. Walk alongside them. Walk with them hand in hand. Be the person that God can use to help provide during their famine. We all know someone that goes through a difficult season in life. Sometimes that's us. Sometimes it's the person beside us. But no one should have to go through a season of chaos alone. The Bible says God never leaves us or forsakes us. And that is 100% true. If you're a follower of Jesus, he is never going to leave you high and dry. But you know what's doubly great? Knowing that Jesus hasn't forsaken us and that other people are by our side. And what a beautiful thing that is. What does that look like? I have no idea. I don't know. I have no idea in your life. It could be that you help provide for someone spiritually, to not just pay lip service and say, hey, I'm going to pray for you, but to actually pray for them and to check in on them. Sometimes but people need something materially, something physically. If you know someone's going through a difficult season, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm not can I bring you dinner? Hey, I'm bringing you dinner. And then always follow up with that second question. When's a good time? Remember, we don't serve people because it's convenient to us. We should serve people when it's the best opportunity for them. We're all going to experience a famine. But when we do, I want to encourage you not to panic. Instead, to hold on, to stay faithful, because God is at work, even in the chaos. I invite you to bow your heads, close your eyes. Praise team's going to come up and lead us in one final song. And as you sit there with your head bowed, eyes closed, just kind of run through that checklist of things we've just talked about. Let God start to reveal to you the way that you respond to chaos. And if you respond to chaos just out of panic and I got to figure it out on my own, let it be an opportunity for you to give that over to the Lord. Stay committed to the plan that God has laid before you instead of trying to go do things on your own. Give God glory. And come alongside people who are in a season of chaos and help be the calm in their lives as you point them to Jesus. Father, I'm so grateful for this morning, for the reminder from your word that even in the famine, even when life seems upside down, God, you aren't. You aren't panicked. You aren't ever out of sorts. God, you're never caught unaware. God, you are always in control. So God, help us trust in you. Help us trust in you in the chaos. And then help us be part of the calm that gets us through the chaos. As we point people to the only God who is able to sustain, to the only God who is able to save. Father, help us trust. Trust in a God who will never leave us, a God who will never forsake us. God, you're never going to abandon. You're never going to be done with us. God, you're there through it all.